So I'm going to present you in the unusual order from left to right. And so we have, first of all, speaking Samuel Dupéré, who's the manager of Statistical Information Services at Statistics Canada. And then we'll go to Paul Holley, who's the research director for the Association of Canadian Studies. Then there'll be a dual presentation of Joanne Ross and Doug Brown, who Joanne is manager of the Programs Dean's Office at John Abbott, and one of her responsibilities is the project manager for the Dialogue and Guild Retention Initiatives. And Doug is the Dean of Career Programs at John Abbott. And finally, we'll go to, last but not least, Denise Garreau, who is a graduate from the University of Ottawa and director at Employment and Social Development Canada, responsible for leading the program, policy development, and implementation of pathway programs for youth. One sentence. Okay, so let's get started right away. Over to you, Samuel. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me. I said I'm manager of Statistics Canada. I work here in Montreal. We work at the Statistical Information Service. Just to give you a preview of what we do outreach, presentations like today, information sessions, special projects, capacity building, which are workshops and webinar, advisory services and consultations, custom table and geography. And our goal basically is to promote the use and understanding of stat and data. I just want to acknowledge the presence of my colleague, Thérèse Nguyen. She's here with me today, so don't hesitate if you want to come talk to us questions. So for the presentation today, my goal is to look at Anglophones who lived in Quebec in 2011 and where they ended up in 2016. So we call it the mobility over 5 years. So we ask people who lived in Quebec in 2011 and we look at Canada, where do they live now. So first I'll present the data sources and concept. I'll do a summary portrait. And I'll try to answer a few questions like, are Anglophones more likely to move? Who is the most likely to move within that group? And where do people move? So my goal basically is to set the table, just present some facts, and maybe the other presenter will be able to provide more background on what motivates people to move. So just a mandatory slides about the data sources. Everything you'll see in there is based on the 2016 census. The detailed questionnaire was distributed to 25% of the private households. The collection was done in May 2016. The response rate was 97.8, so very good. Language proficiency is self-reported. What I mean by that is, for some questions, like knowledge of official language, we ask people, are you able to hold a conversation in that language? We don't test people. It's self-reported, so we just accept what they say as a fact. The data is from both custom and standard tables. And excluded from the following results are some Indian reserves, people who moved out of Canada, obviously, because they were not in the sample anymore, recent immigrants, which means in the last 5 years, people under 15, because we have data on labor and education, so we don't ask those questions to people under 15, and people living in collective dwellings, which are hospitals, prisons, and things like that. So which variable do we use to identify the English-speaking community? We use the first official language spoken. Why do we do this? Well, first of all, because it's defined in the official regulation. Derivation method is defined as in the, how the federal government identifies clientele to provide service. Also, I mean, I have the feeling working with different clients that it's very commonly used as a variable, so I feel comfortable using that. And it uses the knowledge of official language, the mother tongue, and the home language. So what we mean when we say a variable is derived, it's not a single answer to a direct question, so are you male or female? It's several questions that are combined to derive an answer. So this big box, you don't need to read through all of it, defines who would be under the English category in that variable. So these are all the possible scenarios. I'll show you a little flow chart. It's more obvious when we look at it that way. So it's a 3-stage process. So the first one, we ask the knowledge of official language question, which, as I said earlier, is can you hold a conversation in that language? So if you say, I can only do that in English or I can only do that in French, it's pretty straightforward because obviously your first official language is English or French. It gets trickier when you say both or neither. So if you say both, I can hold a conversation in French and English, then we have to go to the second step, which is ask about your mother tongue. So if we go back, you say, yes, I can hold a conversation in both, but my mother tongue is English, then you go into the English category. But what if on the second step you also say both? It's possible in Canada. So we go to the third step and we ask, what is the language you often spoke at, you speak the most often at home? Then if you say both again, you end up in the both category later. But I hope you can see like the different flow of the answers. And we will get to the final result to the right. So just to be clear, in this presentation, we will be talking about the people in the English box on the right side, and also people who said English and French. Okay, so what do we come up with when we look at this population for Quebec? So we have a total of about 1 million people. The way the graphs are presented here and following is the black bars will be the total population as a percentage, and the blue bar will be the Anglophones. So what we see here is the age distribution. As you can see, it's a slightly younger population because the left-hand side of you see the blue bar above on the left-hand side. It's also a slightly more educated population. As you can see, we have more people in the university certificate, bachelor or above level, and also for the cégep and high school. Then if we look at income and labor force, we can say that they have a slightly lower income and higher unemployment rate. So median income for total population and median income for Anglophone who are still living in Quebec, so living in Quebec in 2016. The reason why I do it that way is because obviously if you move to Alberta, where median income is higher, you might have a higher income than if you stayed in Quebec. And to the right-hand side, you see the unemployment rate, which is about 1 percentage point higher. And finally, what if we look at immigration? Well, this is where it gets really interesting for me, because you can see that on the right-hand side graph, Anglophones are much more likely to be immigrants. You can see that it's over 42% of the Anglophones who are either immigrants or non-permanent residents. So we have to think that this probably has an impact on the population as a whole. Because we know from...
Can I ask you a question? What is your definition of immigrants? How long?
Not born in Canada. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah. So we know from Census and other studies that immigrants in Quebec are typically younger, more educated, have lower income, have higher unemployment, and obviously are more likely to be a visible minority. So we have to think that this has an impact on the data we've seen earlier. So what kind of impact does it have? We can try to control with one variable. So here I've looked at income. So the way this table works is that the first line would be the total population, and everything below is compared to that reference of the first line. So the percentage you see on the right is compared to the first line. So first of all, we look at non-immigrants, we see that they have 4% higher median income. And then we look at immigrants, we can see that a 17% lower income. So as we said earlier, they have lower income in general. Then what about Anglophone immigrants? Well, minus 19%, which is pretty close to the 17% as well. Then same logic for the Anglophone non-immigrants, they get like a little premium over the median income of the total population. Then we come to Anglophone non-migrants, and what non-migrant means is a migrant is someone who moved, but to a different city or to a different province. So a mover is just someone who moved, and a migrant is someone who left the city or left the province. So you have to move to a different city at least. We could see that people who didn't move are lower by 7%. And the next two ones are the most interesting for me, so that's why I highlighted them. You can see that for migrants, whether they move within Quebec or outside of Quebec, they do have an income premium. And where it gets the highest premium is basically for Anglophone second gen. So this is generation status. It means that one of your parents is an immigrant. And what it hints at is that people probably move for economic reasons, because you get a premium when you move. And then if we go down the chart, we can see Anglophone third gen, which is slightly lower, Anglophone second gen migrants, and then the biggest premium is when you're an Anglophone second gen who moves within Quebec. So this is interesting. I don't have much to say about it. I just found it interesting that we have this progression. So now we have like a general portrait of who's within that community. We'll look at who is more likely to move. So here I split the population in two, Anglophone and Francophones. And the way to read this table is that the 13%, it means 13% of Anglophones are migrants. So 13% of Anglophones moved and 14% of Anglophones. So here we see it's pretty close, 13 to 14. Then interprovincial is you move within your own province. Interprovincial, you move to a different province. You can see that Anglophones are more likely to move to a different province, 5% versus 1%. But where it gets really interesting is if we look at the younger generation, so 15 to 34. So obviously, whether you're an Anglophone or Francophone, you're more likely to move when you're that age because it's a phase in life where you're more likely to move for work or for university. But for me, where it gets interesting is you can see that the interprovincial migrants, aged 15 to 34, it's 10 to 1 for the Anglophones versus the Francophones. So when Anglophones move, they are much more likely to move outside of the province. So you see how it's decomposed. So the 23% is 22 versus 1% for the Francophones, and then it's almost split in half for the Anglophones. Okay, so now we look at other characteristics. So the way to read this chart is that the red line is the 13% overall, so 13% of Anglophones move. And whenever it's above that line, we can see that they're more likely to move, and when it's below it, they're less likely to move. So first we look at education. To the left. So to the left is university graduate at 17%, so we know that university graduates are more likely to move. Then I looked at studied outside of Quebec because I thought, well, if you go study outside of Quebec, maybe you're more likely to stay outside of Quebec afterward, but to my surprise, it didn't really have an effect. Then we have visible minority, which is almost at 13%, but within certain groups like West Asian, Korean, Japanese, you can see that it's above. Then we already talked about the age, but the group where it's really noticeable is 25 to 34, which means that for Anglophones, 25 to 34, 21% of them moved. Then where do people go? 5% of the Anglophones left Quebec. To my surprise, most of them, they go to Montreal. So it means that they lived somewhere else in Quebec and they moved to Montreal. Then it's Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, rural Quebec, other cities in Quebec. So it's not that surprising, and it's pretty close to the general population movement we would see within Quebec. But what if we look at one of the group identifiers here? What about the young university graduate? Then we can see that 17% of them left Quebec. Again, a lot of them go to Montreal, but they're more likely to go to another province. So Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, it's less rural as well. And one last bonus, so if you promise not to show that to anyone. So where do migrants have the highest income? So basically, where do you need to move to get money? Well, I guess the conclusion from that is that we're still a resource-based economy. You can see that most of these places are where there's resource extraction, where people move to make money, basically. They go there to work in the mines and the oil fields. The only one I couldn't explain was Canmore, which is a beautiful city, but maybe the tourism industry, something like that. So I'll leave it there, and if you have questions, we can talk about it later.
Okay, so this study actually stems from a 2016 study from IRCC. It was funded by IRCC. And I'm of the idea that if you do a study, you shouldn't just present the data to the feds and then just bury it. I want to reuse the data and keep presenting on this as a different aspect of something I presented in the past. So should I stay or should I go? The retention of English-speaking students post-graduation in Quebec. Just to start off with, we'll go pretty quickly here. This is the methodology. It was basically an online survey that was done with 3 English-speaking universities in Quebec. And this sample in particular that had complete information had 355 responses, 120 from Legault, 188 from Concordia, where we had the most, and 47 total from Bishops. And if you look at students' place of birth, you can see it was a mix from Quebecers, 124, rest of Canada, 101, and international, 130. And you can see them studying full-time, mostly part-time, and a few of them were studies on hold. Just a little bit breakdown of the sample here. Again, full-time students, studies on hold. We already saw that graduates versus undergraduates, so it was a little bit heavy on the graduate degree seekers, as well on females, almost 3-to-1 female sample. Visible minorities, about 1/3 of the sample. And then mother tongue. Now this was done at the three universities where they speak English. However, there is still a sample of French-only speakers. English was 45%, English and French 18%. And you see other and multiple language groups there. So basically what I did is I got into a series of regressions or a path analysis. And I just want to kind of outline the key variables that I used in this analysis. So the independent variable, I really had a hypothesis that it's not so much the French language, your ability to speak French that integrates you here. That's a big key factor, but it's really how you use it. So in terms of social integration, are you going out in the community? Are you engaging with other groups, university groups, non-university groups, community services, and so on? Are you engaging with the French language? And I think that's probably more important than actually learning it itself, the language itself. So here, I created a scale on French proficiency. They were asked their abilities in speaking, understanding, spoken French, reading, and writing. And you can see the breakdowns here. This was initially a 1 to 5 scale for each of these variables. So you have the mean, the standard deviation, and the sample sizes there. You see obviously in Quebec, the ability to speak French if they're from Quebec is going to be much higher than, say, the rest of Canada or international. It's only 2.47, so halfway through the scale. So basically what I did is I created a continuous variable on the 1 to 5 scale is recoded from 0 to 4, and then this is what you have. The mean for Quebec, 3.11, the rest of Canada, 2.34, international, 1.97 on a 0 to 4 scale. And that's French proficiency. I weighted it. I did a speaking, I gave it a 40% weight, understanding spoken French 30, reading 20, and 10. In other words, I'm saying that it's more important to be able to speak it than to read and write it. That's the key independent variable. I think with a path analysis, we treat at least one variable as a dependent variable and as an independent variable. And this is that intermediary variable here. So social interactions in French. So in this survey, we had a battery at the end which asked them a lot of if they engage with their friends and family or fellow students, members of university groups, non-university groups, and community services. To what extent they engaged in those with in the French language in particular. And you can see the most. So Quebec is in blue, the rest of Canada is in the brown, and the lighter blue is international. Overall, you can see that students are engaging in French a lot more frequently in the community and with non-university groups, so really in the community more so than the actual university itself, just based on this analysis. And obviously, Quebecers are speaking it more frequently, and it kind of varies between international and the rest of Canada. And then so basically, this is the actual variable that was used in the analysis. So the interactions, you can have no interactions in French. There was 40% of the sample. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in other words, it's just a simple additive scale. If they engaged in all of these types of activities in French language, then they got a 5 on that scale. So they're really engaging in the French language. And the next thing I did, I just kind of wanted to estimate what are some retention rates, because we're really interested in the title of the presentation, should I stay or should I go? What happens when these kids graduate? Are they staying in Quebec or are they leaving? And that's part of the previous presentation. So this is the actual dependent variable, how likely are you to stay in Quebec after you graduate? You see the very likelies and the somewhat likelies here. Quebecers are more likely, it seems like, obviously. But we're going to get a little bit more into detail of that. So this next slide, I think, is the most important one. It's basically I estimated retention rates for each of these groups I'm about to show you by adding the very likely, somewhat likely, and I assigned half of the neutrals to the retention category. I thought otherwise it'd be underestimating the actual retention rates. So here's just like, there's actually select variables broken down by retention rates. You see the sample sizes in the middle column. And if you start off here with Quebec, you see retention rates estimated, 69% for those who are from Quebec. Makes sense. They probably have friends, family living here. Rest of Canada is under 50%. And just as a marker here, you can see overall is 56.8% estimated retention rate for the sample. This was for 355 youth from the 3 schools I mentioned earlier. So Concordia actually, good thing we're at Concordia, they have the highest retention rate amongst students of our sample. Doesn't mean it's overall, this was a limited sample. So 59%, 53% for McGill, 50% for Bishops, a little bit smaller. As we know, we have somewhat of an issue retaining English speakers here. So English speakers amongst the mother tongue have the lowest retention rate at 46.9. French 68.8, similar to those from Quebec. It's probably a very similar group. English and French, so bilingual, 60%. Non-official languages and multiple languages, actually, 75% retention rate, which is pretty interesting. A lot of those, they'll speak English and French and some other language too. So again, based on that proficiency scale that I created, those who are proficient, and I define that as being a native French speaker, bilingual, and are having professional working knowledge of the language, and 63% retention rate versus a 49.5% retention rate. This next one was satisfied with your learning experience. If you were very satisfied or somewhat satisfied, then you had 56% retention rate, 59 if you're satisfied with the living experience, 57% if you're satisfied with your university experience, and if you're satisfied with community services, it's actually higher, 64% retention rate. Between males and females, females tend to have a higher retention rate. Although it was only a sample of 6, the other category, 83% retention rate. They seem to like the diversity here, perhaps. Studies on hold versus part-time or full-time, you can see the different retention rates. Those on hold had the highest rate, even though it was only 12 people. Probably because a lot of them have jobs already and they're getting integrated into the community. Here's a breakdown by age group. You can see that we have the best retention for the 26 to 30-year-olds and the over 35-year-olds, according to this sample. Remember, this was a heavy graduate student sample. And visible minorities, slightly less likely than not visible minorities to stay in Quebec. And this was something I found interesting. Out of the different living situations, alone they don't have very good rates of retention. Neither do those with roommates. But university residents, if you live in the university while you're doing your studies, 72% retention rate for some reason. And so what I did, again, these are sample rates based on our study sample. And I tried to do a path analysis with all this information to find what are some of the causal pathways leading to integration and retention of English speaking and other groups in their youth. So this might look busy, but I'll walk you through it. This is really the last bit. It's a path analysis. I could have gotten a little bit more sophisticated and done like structural equation modeling, but I figured this would be sufficient. So really all I'm doing here is you see the arrows. I'm staying in Quebec, the retention rate, that's the end goal, right? The dependent variable. And then the social interactions in French is also a dependent variable, which leads to, you see it has a causal pathway to staying in Quebec. So if you increase your social interactions in French, you have a plus 0.163, that's your standardized beta coefficient when it's significant and is positive. We see French proficiency, which is interesting here. If you look for the blue, it's in stay, that's their retention rates, if they're likely to stay or not. It's actually not significant, the direct effect. But there is a significant indirect effect because French proficiency works through social interactions. In other words, the more proficient you are in French, the more likely you are to engage in social interactions with friends and family and students and so on and so on. And that thereby increases your retention rate. Okay? Again, some other integration measures, where you live, where you study, where you work, those can have an influence on your social interactions in French. In particular, university residence increases social interactions. It also increases your chances of staying in Quebec. So it's kind of one of those neat little findings. I didn't really know what to think of that. And then other variables, language. So if you're French only, that does have an increase on your social interactions in French, but I'm not really predicting that so much increasing your ability to stay in Quebec because it's tied to these other variables, your French proficiency and so on. You can see they're correlated. Overall, the model explains about 16-17% of the variance in retention, so again, there's a lot that's left unexplained. But in terms of explaining social interactions in French, almost half the variance is explained there, 4 to 7%. And so what I did is I calculated for French proficiency. Again, the direct effect is if you do it with zero order, it's a 0.240 relationship correlation. It's pretty significant. And there's an indirect effect of 0.193, which was calculated. And I think you're getting up, so it's time for me to wrap up here. So here's a couple of key findings, and this is the last slide. Proficiency in French is not a strong determinant of their likelihood of staying in Quebec post-graduation. However, French proficiency does improve retention indirectly through social interactions in French. Students belonging to non-official groups or multiple language groups have significantly higher retention rates than English speakers. And while French speakers are more likely than English speakers to engage in social interactions using French, they're not more likely to stay in Quebec after graduation. And I mentioned also that the university residence was a significant predictor, both indirect and direct, in terms of student retention. That's it.
Up next are Joanne Ross and Beth Brown from John Abbott College.
So hello everyone. John Abbott College is situated at the western tip of the island of Montreal, next to McGill's McDonald campus. And in 2020, we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary as an English language CEGEP. According to SRAM data from the fall of 2017, of our 6,600 day students, 36% had their permanent address in Quebec, but off the island of Montreal. 2/3 of the 6,600 day students were registered in pre-university programs such as science and social science, and the remaining third in the 12 technology programs. Of special interest today are 5 of John Abbott's technology programs: nursing, dental hygiene, police tech, pre-hospital emergency care, and youth and adult correctional intervention, as they are related to the areas of health, justice, and social services. Their total registration of 765 students, or only 11% of the student population. And this may seem small, but Doug will explain why this presentation is focusing on these 5 programs.
So as you know, the Official Languages Act provides funding to provincial minority language groups. In Quebec, some of these funds are distributed by McGill's Institute for Health and Social Policy via the Dialogue McGill program, where our closest collaborator is Jean Robert, who's with us today. This is the 5th year that John Abbott has participated in regional retention projects with Dialogue McGill in the areas of health, justice, and social services. And the goal of the survey Joanne will be sharing with you was to collect information on the 765 students eligible for these programs. There are currently 3 Dialogue McGill initiatives at John Abbott, each of them relating to retention and leading to benefits for the Quebec English-speaking community, students, and educational institutions. All the initiatives have the goal of improving health and social services for the English-speaking community.
After obtaining the approval of the John Abbott College Research Ethics Board, an optional 8-question-long survey was made available to all day students on the college's portal at the end of 2017, October. After 2 weeks, we closed the survey, and we were very excited to see that the response rate to this anonymous, voluntary, non-remunerated survey was 53%. 3,495 out of 6,600 day students had answered the 8 survey questions. The first 3 questions were drop-down menu options, and students were asked to select their program, their anticipated graduation date, and where they lived when they applied to John Abbott College, i.e. where is home. This first chart shows the information collected in response to the question, where is home? SRAM data have told us that our Montreal students should be in the vicinity of 63.9%, and our survey said 64.8%, so we had an excellent sample. By filtering the responses to the first 3 questions, we extracted the 5 technical programs that are eligible for the Dialogue project, and noted that there are some statistically significant differences between these 5 programs, as well as between their overall average and that of the rest of the college's students. So here's their average, and here's the college. Some of this could be because John Abbott College offers the only English language CEGEP tech programs for dental hygiene, police, pre-hospital care, and youth and adult correctional intervention, as well as the fact that we have the residence that accommodates 195 students. We then asked students about their interest in working in a region of Quebec that was off the island of Montreal, and broke down the responses based on what they had previously selected as their home region. Of note is that within each of the 5 programs, The interest in working away from Montreal is higher for the students who have their home off the island. In blue, for each of the programs, you will see that the majority of students from the regions indicated that they are interested in living and working in the regions, possibly even their home region, after the completion of their studies. Interestingly, a large percentage of dialogue students from Montreal, these are the orange ones, also are interested in working off the island of Montreal after graduation. This slide shows that both categories of dialogue students are more interested in moving to the regions than the average non-dialogue John Abbott student. Even so, 50% of the non-dialogue students at John Abbott College are interested in working or living in the regions. We realize we can't accurately measure plans, but ask the following question to get a sense of what students were thinking. Are you planning to live or work in your home region upon the completion of your studies, CEGEP and or university? And the three choices we offered to respondents were yes, no, and not sure. In the gray bar at the right of each of the two categories, the off-island students and the Montreal students, note the high rate of uncertainty for the dialogue students who have their home off the island of Montreal versus those on the island. These students are not in the planning phase yet. They don't know what they're doing.
Can I just say something about that? Can we go back to it? Sure. There are lots of comments that can be made about these slides, this information. The only thing I'll note here is that the actual leaving rate of students or graduates from the province is much higher than the intentions. At least at the age the students are at in CEGEP, only 16% of the students from Montreal indicate that they are planning to stay in Montreal, and about 27% of students from the regions. So at that age, maybe naively thinking that they will have opportunities here or not knowing what the allure of other places would be, they are intending to stay here. The stats we have is that over 50% actually do leave.
Students were also asked what would motivate them to plan to live or work in their home region. By far the greatest factor was family and friends. And this was true across all types of students in the college.
I'll say something here too. If you look at this, you can see the factors motivating them to stay indicate that the community identification is rather low, which maybe should motivate people in the community sector and community groups to reach out more and involve young people in them. And that family and friends is very high. We've had recruiters from the US coming to recruit nurses, and one of the things they did, realizing that people would move if they had friends, is they would recruit students in groups to go work in Virginia or wherever it was, so that people in the regions recruiting into hospitals and so forth could think about trying to recruit people from the same program in groups. Lifestyle as well for promoting the regions is very attractive, so people from the regions can promote the beauty of their region and the lifestyle and so forth.
We thought the comfort level in French might be a factor, so the final two questions solicited the students' opinion on whether or not they felt that their current level of spoken or written French would be an obstacle for them in terms of living or working off the island of Montreal. In the light green column, in the left-hand grouping, you can see that 38.3% of dental hygiene students, and on the right-hand side, you can see that 31.6% of the youth and adult correctional students stated that their current level of spoken French would be an obstacle. And as shown by the gray columns, the percentages were even higher for their written French. As you can see, written French is something that a significant portion of students in all dialect programs, except police tech, in the central grouping, that all these other groups identified it as an obstacle.
Maybe I'll just say a few things here as well. There are lots of Francophone students in the police tech program, and even among the Anglophones, they're somewhat older and they've had time as young adults to work on the French. In dental hygiene, we have a certain number of students who are recent arrivals in the province, and as well, a lot of those people are women in midlife switching careers who've had families or some other career, and so they haven't necessarily used their French. In youth and adult correctional, which is for French is a considerable barrier, these are a lot of students right out of high school who need to work on the French and haven't had any work experience really. And by the way, there are many opportunities for people in youth and adult correctional if they do get their French up.
On the left-hand side of the next slide are the spoken and written averages of the 5 dialogue programs. If we remove the police tech students from the calculations and restate the averages in the middle grouping, we can see that the dialogue students' average shifts to 28.7% identifying spoken French as an obstacle and 38.2% identifying written French as an obstacle. Both percentages are above the rest of the college's averages of 20.7 and 22.1. In conclusion, with the exception of the police tech students, many dialogue students perceive French as an obstacle to living or working off the island of Montreal. This survey was completed at this time last year, and Doug will explain what initiatives have been undertaken since then and what will be happening in the future.
Before I talk about those initiatives, if you have any questions about how the issue of French companies varies from program to program, we can talk about that because it is very specific to the domain the students are in. So the results of our work on this survey is that we're going to repeat the survey at John Abbott College. In fact, we're expanding it over the next 2 years to all of the English language cégeps in Quebec that have health and social services technical programs. So that's something we're going to be doing this year and next year, again, in collaboration with Dialogue McGill. As the Dean of Technologies, I've been working with the college's French department to reinforce teaching of French to our dialogue and our technology students. Remember, the technology programs lead directly to employment. So French is a really critical issue, and in terms of youth retention, the technology programs have a particular importance. Dialogue McGill has provided funding to support students in 4 dialogue programs that require enhanced French. We've also applied, and we're hoping we get funding from the OQLF, the Office Québécois de la Langue Française, to support francisation initiatives in high tech and for immigrants, in technology programs that have internship components, as well as our continuing education program for internationally educated nurses. We continue to explore internship opportunities for dialogue students to visit or return to the regions. In addition to the Lower Laurentians, we are expanding the territory for the Jack Caravan Dialogue McGill project to include the Moderator, and are collaborating with the Counter Association and Place aux Jeunes en Région, in addition to Four Corners, to find internships and job prospects for our graduates. We are also inviting recruiters and community groups from the regions to caravan trips and to our college days to foster and increase links. Last year, Dialogue McGill helped 2 dental hygiene interns go to Mysticini, a Cree community whose first official language is English, for their internships, and that was a great success. I am collaborating with the faculty internship coordinators to seek and publicize job opportunities in the regions. The hope for outcome is that this transitional support will help the not sure groups move to yes when making their post-graduation plans about where to live and work. And finally, we are working with the dialogue program coordinators to advocate for affirmative action in hiring practices in federal and provincial institutions in Quebec. And we can talk about some of the details of that if you have questions during the question period.
Thank you. So last but not least, I would like to invite Denise Gavot from Employment and Social Development Canada, who's going to talk about modernizing their youth employment strategy.
So I just want to kind of make the link here. So I'm from Employment and Social Development Canada. We're in the process of looking at the youth employment strategy, and the government's committed to announcing a new strategy over the next year. So in that context, we're trying to look at the instrument. I mean, it's been in place, and we'll talk about that, I guess, as we get to the presentation. There we go. Here's the outline. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the current youth employment strategy, what we've heard thus far from our various engagement processes, and our vision for the future. So it's a bit of a, well, it's a legacy program, but it's been around since the late 90s, and obviously in that time, a lot of things have changed. So it had excellent results. Some of them I've captured here, but it has, I think it's time for a refresh, and you'll see why. So initially, the program was constructed around 3 streams: summer work experience, career focus for graduates, and skills link for youth with barriers. Issue being now, with transitions the way they are, they're much less linear than they were, back when I was young, So people move in and out of education, so these very like hermetically sealed streams of programming really lack the flexibility to go get and serve youth where they are, and thus the refresh. There we go. So it's a horizontal strategy, not quite a whole of government. It's a horizontal. There's 11 federal departments that have programming under the youth employment strategy, and you can see them listed there. I won't list them out. As you can see, most of them are in the world of graduates. Very few in the realm of youth with barriers, Indigenous Services Canada, CMHC, and Census. So here what you'll see is that this government is very interested in issues related to youth employment. So over all of the budgets since they've been in power, they've put more money into the strategy. So you can see those listed there. Tied to targets, serving as many youth as possible. And we'll talk about that later. Here's some results. Again, lots of people served. 84,000, nearly 70,000 summer jobs. So that, on the surface, some pretty good numbers. We'll get to that. Okay, so here's what, maybe before we get to what we've heard from others, I'll tell you about the unintended consequences between these four walls. Some of the unintended consequences of being driven by these targets is that they're screaming, right? Youth who are more employment ready are those who are served because, for example, in a summer work experience, with the increases in minimum wage, for example, and the desire to hit these 70,000 targets, the work experience has gone down to 8 weeks. 8 weeks, 30 hours. It's not like a fulsome work experience. Maybe for high school it's good, but certainly someone from university, that's inadequate. So these targets have led us to have these sort of quick interventions, but for youth furthest from opportunity, we know this isn't really leading them to success, neither for the employer, neither for the young person. More is required, but obviously that costs more. So here's what we heard from young people. You may know that the government, in addition to all the monies that were invested in the youth employment strategy, in 2016 they launched an expert panel on youth employment. So the expert panel went out and spoke with many, many, many people. It was arm's length, and they provided recommendations to the government, many of which are informing the new strategy. But there were gaps in the discussion, so we've also had separate discussions with various groups, and here's what we've heard both from the expert panel and from our complementary discussions. So youth want a voice, youth want mentorship and career coaching. So what we've heard is that this career development and career management that nobody's in that field anymore. The government of Canada was there until the late 90s. With devolution, it never really picked up at the provincial level, and unfortunately our career guidance counselors in the schools are busy with issues that are mental health related, drug related. They don't have time to do the career planning work. The best that they can do, they say, is help young people choose their courses, for college or CEGEP. So, well, you can read for yourself. There's remove prohibitive requirements. For example, we're very focused on having PSC, and people are interpreting it as prohibitively as possible. That means university, but it doesn't. Like the guidance in the programs don't have the restrictions that we've put into them. So there we go. Employers, there needs to be better awareness. There needs to be better support for employers. I'll keep going because I have a feeling that I'm going to run out of time. Here's what we heard from service providers. Flexibility, modernized supports, better data, adopt a client-centered approach, and a dual client model. The dual client model is where you have an intermediary that can work both with like the non-government organizations that support the young person and broker relationships with the employers. There seems to be a real gap in that space. So we heard that loud and clear. They confirm youth have to have a voice. And we need to find additional supports, not surprisingly, for youth furthest from opportunities, that a quick job placement is insufficient. So here's the vision. So based on what we've heard, we've got our plan moving forward on what a new youth employment strategy could look like. So it has a space for input from youth serving organizations, employers, partners, youth allies. It's about not only investing more money, but making that money work better, so leveraging partnerships and enabling others to act. Providing enhanced supports for youth-facing barriers so that like young people who do need help before they're ready for a job placement, that those supports be available. Recognizing it will cost more, we will serve fewer youth. Enhanced results measurement framework. We've been doing a good job measuring people in work, people going back to school, but when you're serving youth furthest from opportunity, you need milestone measures because it's going to take a long time before that youth is in employment. So acquisition of skills, that the development, the self-confidence of the young person are things that we need to do better at measuring and recognizing as a success. Common branding and digital gateway. So folks who have participated in federally funded youth employment strategy program often aren't even aware of the fact that they have been part of that program. And the digital gateway, I've heard from a young person, I always smile when I say is that visiting government websites is soul destroying. So we need to do a much better job at integrating the information and making it user-friendly and something that a young person would actually want to use. So with 21 programs in 11 departments, it really is a bit of a spaghetti, and hard to get to. And then finally, demonstrate leadership. So we're trying to encourage employers to play a leadership role, but the government of Canada has to walk the talk and employ youth, but not only youth who are fresh out of university with a master's and a PhD now for an entry-level position, that we need to walk the talk and hire youth who have had barriers to opportunities and figure out how to bring them into our ranks, creating pathways for them as well. So here's what the vision is for the integrated program. The young person, same Service Canada channel, so you would have the phone. I know not many people use the phone, but youth allies still use the phone, being one for my kids. In person, and like I say, over the internet, that they would have access to a needs assessment, and then to that wheel of supports. A young person who's ready for just a job placement could go directly into a job placement, but that those young people who need counseling, drug addiction help, could have those supports. Digital gateway, I'm just going to go quickly through that. It's a focal point, streamlined, one-stop shop. Again, want to use social media better and go and find youth and meet youth where they are. There's also a lot of work being done for web optimization. You'll see it's not my file, so don't ask really hard questions on this section. Thank you, Rita. I'll wrap up. Right, so if the young people use Google, right, they're not going to go to a government website, so there's a cleanup of all of our sites going on, so that when the young person goes, find job opportunities in Quebec, that those would be the first, hits that they would get. So that is, it sounds simple, but it is a really complex piece of work that has been being undertaken for the past months, and they're still hard at it. So then we have other signature initiatives for youth. For example, we've heard that the youth policy will be launched, and the Service Corps, Canada Service Corps, for opportunities for volunteering, so that all of the branding and information will be brought together as part of a bigger whole. Employment, of course, being a very important element. And then, thank you.
My name is Emma Legault. I work for Learn, which is an educational nonprofit. My question is for Denise. And you sort of commented on it, I think, a little flippantly there, but hiring people with a bachelor's and or a PhD for an entry-level position. And I guess I want to know if the strategy in any way, shape, or form will work with employers to make jobs, wages for youth a little fairer, and it a little more accessible to enter the job market, because increasingly that is exactly what people ask for jobs that pay as little as $30,000 a year.
Yep. Okay, well, the issue of wages, you didn't ask the hard questions, but so how to work with employers. Let me start with that piece. And the wages, you'll maybe be underwhelmed on the wage side, but hopefully I can give you some answers on what we're exploring right now. So you may have heard of a coalition of employers called the Opportunity for All Youth Coalition. In fact, they were here in Montreal just a couple weeks ago doing a hiring event. So that coalition, we've got some very committed employers that are part of that. So there's RBC, there's Starbucks, there's Nestle. So some big, I mean, and I mean, there are many more, just the ones that are top of mind. So they're working with Mars Lab on an initiative, which is a challenge to hire, they want to hire 40,000 youth who are furthest from opportunity over the course of a year, and now they've extended that challenge to 100,000 for, I don't know, maybe 3 years. So we're working and actually becoming part of the coalition of employers to not only look at how we can bring these people into our ranks, but with using financial, we use our funding through the youth employment strategy, which used to always go to the individual youth. We're now looking at mechanisms like that. So in this case, we're working with Mars, that's supporting this coalition of employers, on pathways. So the pathway scenario is quite interesting because a young person can come in either via a social enterprise, for example, that a work specific one, so somebody that's really not ready for a work experience. Once they get through that program, Starbucks will take them on as a barista. And the coalition means that the person can then, once they get through that, they can then work for the bank, etc. So the pathways are pathways to careers, both within the individual organizations and between them. So it's really something that's, I think, quite interesting, where we're seeing a number of employers who want, and it's not only because they're, lovely charitable organizations. They are really feeling the issue of not being able to employ. And graduates are wonderful. University graduates are wonderful, but they do not stay. So this is for them. It's very important to the bottom line, and we're seeing that uptake and a lot of exciting stuff going on. So, as the federal government, we are trying to enable that kind of stuff.
Just a quick question before you move on. What is Mars aside from a planet?
What is
Mars?
Mars?
Oh,
I'm sorry. Mars Labs is a Toronto-based not-for-profit, and they do a lot of social innovation type work. So it's like a think tank type thing.
Sorry. Next.
I have two questions. I don't know what. Okay, I'll go quickly. Okay. Just my first question I would like to direct to Paul and Samuel. My name is Nina from CEDAC. I work on workforce development. And there's one statistic that I just wanted to confirm, and maybe it was because I was going through it too quickly. The age group, Paul, that you mentioned that had the highest retention rate in Quebec, you listed, I think their mother tongue is other than English or French as an official language, is the age group between 26 to 30. However, Samuel, when you were doing your presentation with StatsCan, you had mentioned that this is precisely the age bracket 15 to 34 with the highest fertility rate. Can you just explain the discrepancy between the two figures? Because we're talking about a subpopulation within a population.
I think it's just the different samples. I mean, mine's...
Into the mic for recording.
I think it's probably the different samples. I mean, mine is was based on 355 students from 3 Quebec universities, and over half the sample is graduate students, so it's very particular. It's not going to be a general population.
Okay.
So the rates, that's why I use the cautionary note that these are based on this sample. It's not, even amongst the universities, it might not be reflective of the overall rate.
So if we're thinking about workforce development in Quebec as a whole, which sample would you say is a more accurate portrait of reality if we have to think about developing policies and programs and services to address the larger workforce development needs? Which sample would we be looking at to really develop these types of programs?
Well, I don't know the exact sample. don't know the exact sample, but I would suggest you go with the more general Statistics Canada sample, unless you're dealing specifically with graduate students or students in my sample might be more relevant.
The census is representative of everyone in Canada. The only caveat is that it's a snapshot, so it's done every 5 years, and it's like a picture in time. So now we have 2016. It was May 2016, so that was the situation there. And as I said, because I was talking about mobility, I don't have anyone in my sample who came in after 2016. So the only problem is that maybe there's a different trend with recent immigration. We know that there's a shift from country of origin. Sometimes it can change the dynamic. But overall, I agree with what was being said. We could slice it up differently, look at a specific population if you have an idea in mind, and see if the results are different.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. My name is Celine Cooper. I teach here at Concordia School of Community and Public Affairs. And I have a question actually that I'll direct to Joanne and Doug, although I would welcome responses from any of you. And my interest is in outreach from the provincial government to create pathways for youth to work in the public civil service. And I'm wondering if, you mentioned that you've got recruiters coming from Virginia to recruit in groups, which I also find a really interesting approach. Have you had any interaction with the provincial government to bring your students into the civil service?
First, I'll make a comment about the recruiters from the U.S. Joanne, that was in the past, right? There was a shortage of nurses at one time in the U.S., and so they were coming up. Well, through Dialogue McGill, we've had some dealings with this Kathleen Weil and the Secretariat, so some of the money that we're getting is not just from the federal government. I think it's the survey money that is from the provincial government. So that's something where they see the utility of the survey and they want to expand it. So that's outreach. We've had the provincial government, we've had some response. The chair of our police technology program, Paul Shadlow, is very critical of recruitment practices on part of the SQ and the SPVM. He is a former SPVM officer, but he's critical of these things, and he's been on global news, and he gets response when he goes public. So I don't know if that qualifies as the provincial government. For the first time, I think the SQ is sending recruiters who speak English. And the SQ, he has a couple of complaints. One is the lack of hiring visible minorities, the lack of outreach to Anglophones, and also if they are recruited, the difficulty of the French test they have to pass in order to get into the SPVM, which he thinks is unnecessarily difficult, and there would be ways of bringing people in and improving their French. So from the provincial government, unless I'm forgetting something, Joanne, have we had any particular outreach?
Yeah, you're talking about the civil service? Mm-hmm. Yes, there have been outreaches, especially to our business administration department, and they will be speaking here tomorrow. The person who's the coordinator for that program as far as stashes. And so I'm really sorry, we don't have any direct answer to that question, but we can't get the information for you. But there has been a reach out. They do send their directory out. They ask us to update our information. Then we send it back, and they do post the jobs. They have a very good interactive website.
And has that been a long-standing practice, do you know, or has that sort of been since the announcement by Kathleen Weil?
Oh no, I think we've been dealing with the provincial government, and they've been posting their positions for our internships for our students for a while.
Just StatCan, the federal government has reached out to us. They have some internship programs that are more suitable for university students, but still might be able, might be able to participate in them through our business administration program.
Because our stages are only 4 weeks for credited stash. They do have an ATE, alternate value program, and those are 8 weeks in the summer. But they're really young, those students. They're only 17, and if they have to go to Quebec City, that's a big jump for them to leave home.
Will Clark with the Secretariat for Relations with English-Speaking Quebecers. If I could just comment from the point of view of the Secretariat, it's not just a short-term initiative. I think that we're exploring ways that the government of Quebec can interact with post-secondary institutions, with other parts of civil society to address that long-standing issue. We've had discussions already with Concordia, with École Nationale d'Administration Publique, to try to develop some programs that might clear the path for those who might want to consider the Quebec Public Service. We know there are lots of barriers, some of them real, some imagined, and we're going to try to address them over the years.
So to just one quick area where there could be some movement is in the correctional system of both federal penitentiaries and institutions of Quebec and provincial ones. It's not something we normally think about, but there's a crying need for bilingual people because there's so much movement of inmates around the country, including, by the way, English-speaking Indigenous people. If you go into Bordeaux, they have done some remarkable things in terms of almost achieving parity between men and women working in there. Lots of visible minorities working there, very, very few Anglophones. But if they can achieve those other sort of progressive things with the workforce, I think they can probably improve things with regard to the hiring of Anglophones. So that's, it's not necessarily that there's bad faith or on the other side, it's just this might be a priority that they have to address now.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Martin-LaForge from the Quebec Community Groups Network. My question is addressed to ESDC. In the youth employment strategy, is there a portion of that, or not a portion, is there a part of a focus on official language minority communities in that strategy? I have a follow-up question to that.
Oh, absolutely, it is. When in the ranking, official language minority communities is a priority. In the summer work experience, it's been a national priority, so it does get points like in the rating system. So yes, it is a priority.
I'm not so interested. I'm absolutely interested in that. I'm talking about from a policy program perspective, at the policy making level.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an
interest or focus? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other piece to my question is, in terms of employers, do you see groups of civil society as part of the employer piece? Because certainly in our communities, francophone hors Quebec and in Quebec, we are employers and we do community development through hiring folks, young people in our communities, which complements identity, attachment, understanding the minority community. So is that part of the strategy as well?
Okay, so I'll try again on the first part of the question around it being a policy priority. We're in a bizarre time right now with the youth employment strategy because there is the old strategy and there's the transition and we're moving into the new strategy. Historically, OLMCs have been a priority, and like I said, that's been enacted operationally in the way that I described. Increasingly, as we're moving forward on the modernization, we have definitely done a lot of work on sort of place-based issues. So not only are we looking to remove barriers to individuals who have barriers to opportunities, but we're definitely looking at places where there are barriers to opportunity. And in that case, OLMCs are highly overrepresented in those communities facing barriers to opportunities locally. So all that to say is yes, from a policy perspective, OLMCs are definitely of interest to in the context of modernizing the strategy. And with your second question, does that answer it?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Okay. Well, yeah. I'm not on the mic, but so will we hear about that one day, or?
The government of Canada has committed to launching the new strategy in the next year. We're all very suspicious it'll be the spring, 2019. So on your other question, NGOs are definitely seen as employers.
Okay, I forgot to thank everybody for the presentations. Very interesting, and I see sort of a field contact there between each of them, and it's a very interesting to mention. This one, it's a follow-up to Sylvia's question for Denise. Under the youth employment strategy as it's set up now, there are programs of Canadian heritage. I happen to be fortunate enough to be involved in the creation of the Young Canada Works in Both Official Languages program. But back in '96, when it was created, the English-speaking community wasn't well structured in terms of having a natural partner. So outside Quebec, we worked with local organizations representing Francophone minority. Here in Quebec, we work with Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, who've done a wonderful job in delivering the programs in the way it was designed. But I think one of the downsides to the current situation, and I would really ask whether in the new formulation, whether that might be considered more carefully, is that the impact on community economic development for English-speaking communities fell by the wayside. It was more like a nation-building part. So the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce could bring hundreds of young people from across Canada into Quebec to work in their second official language, and that was seen as a great benefit, for a number of purposes. But in terms of, say, the local, regional development, there was an opportunity missed there, I think. And I think Samuel's data showed like a differential in terms of employment levels for English speakers and French speakers. And when you break that down by age group, it's even greater. So younger English speakers are not performing as well compared to their Francophone counterparts as older English speakers. So I think there's a really interesting challenge and opportunity there. So I just like to confirm that that'll be part of the mix and part of the thinking.
I think you were the one to question, but...
No,
That wasn't a short question, but I'll try to give a short answer, but it is it's a tough one and a very interesting one. And as a advocate for all things local economic development, it's definitely a balance. And like I say, we've had that unintended consequence of wanting to serve the most youth, and it has in the past been an issue with the quality of service. So absolutely, I told you we're moving to a more partnership model, moving to enable others to act. And absolutely, these sort of local level coalitions are things that we are very interested in, and partnerships with these local organizations, absolutely. And I guess I'll leave it there, but there's a lot more to it, and we can talk over coffee.
I also just want to thank everybody. The presentations today were extremely insightful, and if you could share your PowerPoints, we'd be greatly appreciative. My question is just for Denise. You alluded to this in your presentation, and it was alluded this morning in the opening remark, that in the pathway to employment, an outcome is important to measure versus output. Do you know if the government is working towards building a performance or impact measurement standard based on outcome versus output, where a job seeker who may be just steps below reaching employment but has made a lot of leaps towards its pathway towards employment can be measured in our reporting to you, basically?
Yes, but it's the measuring of progression and the penultimate, performance measurement strategy in this area, as you know, has been the holy grail, of the evaluation community. This said, the evaluation community has come light years on. Collective impact assessment, and a lot of tools are available now. So I guess the short answer is absolutely we are going to do a better job, but it is a challenge, as anyone in the evaluation environment can tell you. It's difficult, but absolutely we are going to be at least better than we were.
Help the community do our role in supporting it, having the right measurement approach.
So I'd like to thank all of our excellent panelists who will be sticking around. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can go and buttonhole them in person. So thank you very much.